There's a word you hear everywhere these days, whispering promises of a completely new life. Resurge, as if you were a phoenix waiting for the perfect moment to be reborn from the ashes of your own existence. As if there were a magic button that, when pressed, would erase your entire history of pain and transform you into a completely renewed version of yourself. But while you wait for this great transformation, while you search for the secret formula of total reinvention, life continues happening. Your problems remain there, waiting. Your insecurities don't disappear because you watched a motivational video. And that feeling of being trapped in your own existence still weighs on your chest when you wake up at 3 in the morning. Franz Kafka understood this in a way that few writers have comprehended. He knew we are not creatures destined to resurge in epic moments of personal glory. We are human beings who endure and move forward. He once wrote that life is a matter of enduring and moving forward, not of resurrecting as something new. And perhaps this brutally honest understanding is exactly what you need to hear today. Not because it's less hopeful than promises of radical transformation, but because it's real. Because it allows you to stop waiting for a completely different version of yourself and start working with who you already are. Maria was 34 when she decided she needed to resurge. She was tired of the job that sucked her soul, the relationship that no longer made sense, the person she saw in the mirror every day. She bought books about personal reinvention, took online courses about discovering your passion, created vision boards with images of the life she wanted to have. For months, she waited. She waited to feel that transformative click that everyone promised would come. She waited to wake up one day being someone completely different. But the days passed, and she continued being the same Maria, with the same insecurities, the same fears, the same limitations. What she didn't know was that she was looking for the wrong thing. She was looking for a new Maria, when she should have been learning to endure and work with the Maria that already existed. Kafka knew this trap. In his letters, he spoke about how we spend our entire lives running from ourselves, hoping to transform into someone we are not. But true strength, he discovered, doesn't come from being reborn. It comes from enduring who you are and continuing to walk. The word endure has a heavy connotation in our culture. We are taught that enduring is conforming, giving up on dreams, accepting a mediocre life. But Kafka saw enduring as the most courageous act a human being can perform. It's not giving up. It's recognizing the reality of your human condition and choosing to continue anyway. It's waking up, knowing you carry wounds that may never heal completely, and deciding it's worth living even with those wounds. It's looking at your defects, your limitations, your repeated failures and saying, this is also me, and I'm going to continue. Pedro discovered this at 29, when his third attempt to start his own business failed. He had invested his savings, worked 16 hours a day, sacrificed relationships. When everything collapsed, he felt he needed to be reborn as an entrepreneur or give up completely. But then he found a third option. He could endure being someone who failed at businesses and continue trying. Not because he was destined for epic success, but because he genuinely liked the process of creating things. The difference was subtle but revolutionary. He stopped waiting for a version of himself that never failed and started working with the version that failed and learned. The modern world has a sick obsession with dramatic transformations. We want before and after. We want stories of people who were one thing and became completely another. We want to believe we can wake up one day being fundamentally different. But Kafka observed life as it really is, a series of ordinary days where we carry the same fears from yesterday, the same insecurities, the same self-destructive tendencies. And the question he asked wasn't, how can I transform myself? But rather, how can I continue being who I am in a way that's worthwhile? This is a much more interesting and much more useful question, because you don't need to wait to become brave to act with courage. You can be an anxious person who acts courageously. You don't need to wait to become confident to try new things. You can be an insecure person who tries new things. You don't need to resurge as someone who doesn't feel fear to face your fears. You can endure being someone who feels fear and face those fears anyway. Anna had been terrified of public speaking since adolescence. For years, she avoided any situation where she needed to express herself in groups. When she decided to go to therapy, the therapist suggested she imagine herself as someone confident, that she visualize a version of herself who loved speaking in public. But the more Anna tried to become this person, the more frustrated she became. The anxiety didn't disappear because she visualized confidence. So she changed her approach. Instead of trying to transform into someone who didn't feel anxiety, she decided to be someone who felt anxiety and spoke in public anyway. The first time she gave a presentation at work, her hands shook and her voice faltered, but she continued. The second time, she was still nervous, but she finished the presentation. By the 10th time, she realized something surprising. She hadn't become a confident person, but she had become an anxious person who could speak in public. And that was more real and more useful than any magical transformation. Kafka wrote about the anguish of existing, but also about the dignity of continuing to exist. He understood that human life is not a story of epic overcoming, where the hero transforms into something completely new. It's the story of someone who carries their wounds and their defects and chooses to keep walking anyway. It's the story of someone who doesn't wait to become perfect to start living, but who lives imperfectly and finds beauty in that imperfection. When you stop waiting to resurge and accept enduring and moving forward, something interesting happens. You stop putting your life on pause. You stop waiting for the right version of yourself to start acting. You stop looking for the magical solution and start working with the imperfect tools you already have. And you discover that these imperfect tools are sufficient to build a life worth living. The concept of moving forward in Kafka doesn't mean just continuing mechanically. It means making conscious choices about how you want to carry your burden. It means actively deciding how you want to live with your limitations. It means transforming the weight of existing into something you carry with purpose, not just something you drag through the days. Carlos always had difficulty with intimate relationships. He would sabotage himself when people got too close, create unnecessary conflicts, flee when things got serious. For years, he waited to wake up one day being someone who naturally knew how to love and be loved. He read books about emotional intelligence, went to therapy, tried to transform into the person who wasn't afraid of intimacy. But the transformation never came. So he decided to try something different. He decided to be someone who had difficulty with intimacy and who worked consciously to create connections anyway. He started warning people about his tendencies, asking for help when he felt like running away, choosing to stay when his instinct was to leave. He didn't transform into someone who loved easily, but he became someone who loved with difficulty and who chose to keep trying. The beauty of the Kafkaesque philosophy of enduring and moving forward lies in its brutal honesty about the human condition. You don't need to pretend you don't have wounds to heal those wounds. You don't need to fake that you're not afraid to face your fears. You don't need to wait to feel ready to start living. You can live unprepared, scared, wounded, uncertain, and still create something meaningful with your existence. Strength doesn't lie in becoming invincible, but in continuing vulnerable. Courage doesn't lie in not feeling fear, but in acting while feeling fear. Wisdom doesn't lie in having all the answers, but in continuing to ask questions. There's a fundamental difference between enduring passively and enduring actively. Passive endurance is when you simply put up with circumstances, hoping they'll pass. It's like being in a toxic relationship and doing nothing about it, just surviving day after day. Active endurance is different. It's when you recognize your limitations and work consciously within them. It's when you accept your difficult circumstances, but choose how you want to respond to them. Kafka practiced active endurance. He knew he was an anxious, obsessive person who struggled with intimate relationships, but instead of waiting to transform into someone different, he used these characteristics as raw material for his art. He transformed his anguish into literature that touched millions of people. He didn't need to stop being anxious to create something beautiful with his anxiety. Lucia always had a complicated relationship with her body. Since adolescence, she felt uncomfortable with her appearance, avoided mirrors, wore loose clothes to hide. For years, she dreamed of the day she would finally feel beautiful and confident. She went on restrictive diets, spent fortunes on beauty products, considered plastic surgery. But no matter how much she changed her external appearance, the internal relationship with her body remained the same. Then she read about a woman who had decided to stop waiting to like her own body and start taking care of it, even while not liking it. Lucia decided to try this approach. She started exercising not to fix her body, but to care for it. She started eating well, not to punish her appearance, but to nourish her health. She started wearing clothes that made her feel cared for, even if she didn't feel beautiful. Slowly, something changed. She didn't wake up one day loving her body, but she developed a relationship of respect and care with it. She learned that she could live well in her body even without completely loving it. The Kafkaesque moving forward is also not about ignoring the past or pretending bad things never happened. It's about carrying your experiences in a way that they become part of your wisdom, not just part of your pain. It's about integrating your wounds into your story in a way that they strengthen you instead of paralyzing you. When you stop trying to erase parts of your history and accept that they are part of who you are, you gain energy that was previously being wasted in the fight against your own reality. Roberto grew up in a family where showing emotions was a sign of weakness. He learned early to suppress his feelings, never to cry, always to appear in control. As an adult, this became a problem in relationships. He couldn't connect emotionally with people, didn't know how to process his own emotions, lived in constant internal tension. For years, he tried to transform into a more emotional person. He went to therapy trying to unblock his feelings, as if there were a switch that could be turned on. But emotions don't work that way. So he decided to accept that he was someone who had difficulty with emotions and who could learn to navigate this difficulty consciously. He started warning close people about this characteristic of his. When he felt he should express something but couldn't, he would say, "I'm feeling something important but have difficulty expressing it. Give me time." He created personal rituals to process emotions alone before sharing them. He didn't become a naturally expressive person, but he became emotionally responsible within his limitations. Modern society has an obsession with constant positive emotional states. We are bombarded with messages about how to be happy, how to maintain a positive mindset, how to eliminate negative thoughts. Kafka saw this as a fundamental denial of human experience. He understood that melancholy, anxiety, sadness, and restlessness are not bugs in the human system that need to be fixed. They are normal characteristics of consciousness. They are signs that you're paying attention to the complexity of life. The problem is not feeling these emotions. The problem is not knowing what to do with them. Kafka teaches us that you can feel sadness and still find meaning. You can feel anxiety and still make important decisions. You can feel melancholy and still create connections with other people. The question is not eliminating these feelings, but learning to dance with them. Joanna was always an anxious person. Since childhood, she worried about things that could go wrong, created catastrophic scenarios in her head, felt tightness in her chest when facing new situations. For years, she saw her anxiety as a defect that needed to be fixed. She tried medications, breathing techniques, meditation, therapy. Some things helped temporarily, but anxiety always returned. That's when she discovered something interesting. Her anxiety was also responsible for some of her greatest qualities. It was what made her extremely careful with details at work. It was what made her prepare meticulously for presentations. It was what made her a present friend, always attentive to others' feelings. Joanna realized that completely eliminating her anxiety would be like erasing part of her personality. So she changed her approach. Instead of fighting against anxiety, she started working with it. She learned to recognize when her worry was useful and when it was being destructive. She developed ways to channel her anxious energy into creative projects. She didn't stop being an anxious person, but she became an anxious person who knew how to use her anxiety productively. The Kafkaesque concept of enduring and moving forward also applies to relationships. Many people wait to find perfect relationships where there's never conflict, where they always understand each other, where they never need to work on differences. But real relationships between real people are made of incompatibilities you learn to navigate, not perfect compatibilities that work automatically. It's about finding someone whose defects you can endure and who can endure yours. It's about two imperfect people who choose to stay together even when things get difficult. Marcos and Paula have been married for 15 years. Marcos is extremely organized and punctual. Paula is spontaneous and creative, but frequently late and disorganized. In the first years of their relationship, they tried to change each other. Marcos tried to make Paula more organized. Paula tried to make Marcos more flexible. This created constant conflicts. Then they realized they were trying to transform the person they loved into someone different. They decided to try a different approach. Marcos accepted that Paula would always be a bit chaotic and created systems to deal with this without getting stressed. Paula accepted that Marcos would always need structure and learned to communicate her plans in advance. They stopped trying to change each other and started working with the characteristics each one had. The relationship didn't become perfect, but it became real and sustainable. The idea of moving forward also doesn't mean leaving behind everything that hurt you. It means carrying your experiences in a way that they become wisdom, not just pain. It means integrating your losses into your life story in a way that they strengthen you instead of diminishing you. Sandra lost her mother at 25 in an unexpected car accident. For years, she tried to overcome this loss, as if it were possible to go back to being the person she was before. She avoided thinking about her mother, avoided places that reminded her of her, tried to keep herself always busy to not feel the pain. But the pain didn't go away. It was always there, like a shadow. So she decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to overcome the loss, she decided to integrate it. She started talking about her mother with friends, visiting places they used to frequent together, honoring her memory in concrete ways. She realized that the pain of loss could coexist with gratitude for memories, that she could carry her mother's absence as a way of carrying her presence. She didn't overcome the loss, but learned to live with it in a way that honored both her pain and her love. The Kafkaesque philosophy invites us to question this toxic positivity culture that tells us difficult feelings are always problematic. Sometimes feeling lost is appropriate because you really are in a confusing situation. Sometimes feeling sadness is appropriate because something sad happened. Sometimes feeling anger is appropriate because something unfair is happening. The problem is not in feeling these emotions, but in not knowing how to respond to them constructively. Kafka teaches us that you can be lost and still continue walking. You can be sad and still find moments of beauty. You can be angry and still act with compassion. Difficult emotions don't prevent you from living a meaningful life. They are part of living a meaningful life. You know that moment when you look at your life and feel like you're carrying a backpack full of stones. Each stone represents a disappointment, a trauma, a fear, a limitation. Modern culture tells you to throw the backpack away and start a new journey without weight. But Kafka invites you to do something different. Learn to carry this backpack in a way that doesn't hurt you. Find a sustainable rhythm. Discover that some of these stones might be useful along the way. The fundamental question that Kafka poses is, what do you do when you discover there's no perfect version of you waiting to emerge? What do you do when you accept that your deepest wounds may never heal completely? What do you do when you stop waiting for the great transformation and accept that real life happens in the small moments of daily choice? The Kafkaesque answer is surprisingly liberating. You stop waiting for permission to live and start living with the imperfect tools you have. You stop looking for the magical solution and start building practical solutions. You stop waiting to feel brave to act with courage and discover that courage is born from action, not the other way around. Fernando always wanted to be a writer, but considered himself a person without natural talent for words. He saw other writers who seemed to have ease with language, who wrote fluently, who had brilliant ideas constantly. He himself struggled with every paragraph, doubted every sentence, rewrote obsessively. For years he waited to develop this natural talent. He took courses, read manuals, studied writing techniques, but the ease never came. So he decided to stop waiting to become a talented writer and start being a writer who worked hard. He established a daily writing routine, even when words didn't flow. He accepted that his process would always be slower and more laborious than others. He developed techniques to deal with his own excessive self-criticism. 10 years later, he published his first book, not because he had developed natural talent, but because he had developed persistence, discipline, and love for the writing process. He became a writer not despite his limitations, but by working consciously within them. The concept of moving forward also means accepting that you will fail repeatedly, and that this doesn't invalidate your efforts. In the personal resurrection culture, failure is seen as evidence that you haven't transformed enough yet. In Kafkaesque philosophy, failure is seen as an inevitable part of trying anything worthwhile. The question is not how to avoid failing, but how to fail in a way that you learn something useful, how to recover from failures in a way that they don't paralyze you, how to use your failures as valuable information about what works and what doesn't work in your life. Patricia tried to open a cafe 3 times. The first time she had no management experience and the business failed in 6 months. The second time, she had learned about management, but underestimated the importance of location. The third time, she had knowledge and location, but the pandemic forced closure. Each time the business failed, she felt tempted to give up completely, as if the failures were evidence that she wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship. But she realized something interesting. Each failure had taught her something specific. She hadn't become a naturally successful entrepreneur, but she had become someone who deeply understood the challenges of opening a cafe. When she finally managed to open her 4th cafe, she didn't do it because she had a guarantee of success, but because she had learned to fail intelligently and was no longer afraid of failure. The art of enduring and moving forward also applies to difficult family relationships. Many people fantasize about having a different family, parents who were more present, siblings who were more understanding, dynamics that were healthier. They wait for a moment of magical reconciliation where all wounds are healed and everyone becomes the people they should have been. Kafka invites us to a different approach. Accept that your family is composed of real people with real limitations and work with this reality instead of fighting against it. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or destructive behaviors. It means accepting that people rarely change in fundamental ways and that you can build healthy relationships working with who they are, not with who you'd like them to be. Ricardo had an emotionally distant father who never showed affection and was rarely present for important moments. For decades, Ricardo waited for his father to change, to recognize his mistakes, to transform into the loving father Ricardo always wanted to have. This waiting caused constant resentment and made every interaction painful, so Ricardo decided to accept that his father was a person with emotional limitations who probably would never change. Instead of waiting for affection that would never come, he started valuing the specific ways his father showed care, remembering to call on birthdays, offering practical help when needed, sharing work stories. The relationship didn't become what Ricardo always wanted, but it became real and less painful. The Kafkaesque philosophy also teaches us about the importance of accepting our own mediocrity in certain areas. Modern culture tells us we can be excellent at everything if we just try hard enough. Kafka recognized that we all have areas where we are fundamentally mediocre and that this is normal and acceptable. The question is not how to become extraordinary at everything, but how to live well being ordinary at most things, and putting your energy into the areas that really matter to you. Carla always envied people who seemed naturally sociable. They would enter a room and immediately connect with everyone, tell funny stories, make everyone laugh. Carla, on the other hand, was always more reserved. In large groups, she felt uncomfortable and forced. For years, she tried to transform into an extroverted person. She took communication courses, forced herself to go to social events, tried to imitate the behavior of more sociable people, but she always felt exhausted and inauthentic. So she decided to accept that she would always be a more reserved person and work with this characteristic. She stopped trying to shine in large groups and started investing in deep connections one by one. She discovered she had a natural talent for intimate and meaningful conversations. She didn't become the most popular person in the room, but she became someone people trusted for important conversations. There's something deeply liberating in accepting that you don't need to be a completely different version of yourself to have a meaningful life. When you stop waiting for the great transformation and start working with who you already are, you discover you always had more internal resources than you imagined. You discover that your supposed weaknesses are sometimes disguised strengths. You discover that your limitations sometimes force you to develop capacities you wouldn't have developed otherwise. Kafka knew this truth intimately. His social anxiety forced him to develop a rich inner life. His difficulty with intimate relationships led him to write about loneliness in a way that touched millions of people. His personal insecurities became the raw material for a literary work that continues relevant more than a century later. The act of consciously enduring also means developing rituals and practices that make the weight of existence more bearable. We're not talking about escapism or denial, but about creating structures that allow you to carry difficulties sustainably. This could be a morning routine that gives you a sense of control over your day. It could be an exercise practice that helps you process stress. It could be a hobby that connects you with a part of yourself that's not always worried about practical problems. It could be a specific friendship where you can be completely honest about your difficulties. Gabriel always had periods of deep depression that lasted months. During these periods, he would completely isolate himself, stop taking care of himself, abandon responsibilities. This created a cycle where depression caused practical problems that made depression worse. After several episodes like this, he decided to create what he called a survival protocol. When he felt depression coming, he activated a minimal routine, a 10-minute walk per day, a weekly call to a specific friend, one nutritious meal per day. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prevent his life from completely falling apart during depressive episodes. He couldn't eliminate depression, but he learned to navigate through it less destructively. The final question that Kafkaesque philosophy poses to us is, what do you do when you accept that life is not about solving all your problems, but about learning to live well with some permanent problems? What do you do when you accept that a certain level of dissatisfaction, anxiety, loneliness and confusion are normal parts of human experience? What do you do when you stop waiting for a state of complete fulfillment and accept that life is made of moments of temporary contentment interspersed with periods of difficulty? The Kafkaesque answer is that you can live a rich and meaningful life even carrying these realities. You can find beauty even in imperfection. You can create connections even in loneliness. You can find purpose even in confusion. You can experience love even in anxiety. Life doesn't need to be perfect to be good. You don't need to be completely fulfilled to be genuinely alive. If you've made it this far and recognized your own struggle in these words, if you're already tired of waiting for a transformation that never comes, if you're ready to stop running from who you are and start working with who you are, then you've understood something fundamental about human existence. Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle of waiting for a better version of yourself, as if your real life could only begin when you finally became the person you always wanted to be? If you know this feeling of eternally preparing to live instead of actually living, write in the comments, "I'm ready to begin." You don't need to explain anything more. These simple words are an acknowledgement that you can stop waiting for the perfect version of yourself and start working with the real version. And when you do this, you're giving permission for other people to also stop waiting and start living. If you found value in this reflection, if it touched something you recognize in your own experience, don't forget to leave a like. This small gesture helps more people find these ideas when they need them. And if you want to continue exploring these deep questions of human existence through the wisdom of thinkers like Kafka, subscribe to the channel. Every week, we create a space for those who understand that life's most important questions don't have simple answers, but deserve to be explored with honesty and courage. Because your journey of self-knowledge doesn't need to wait for an epic transformation. It can start today with who you already are, carrying what you already carry, moving forward one step at a time. You don't need to resurge to start living. You just need to endure who you are and choose to move forward.